Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah, Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. How's everybody? Alhamdulillah. So today, continuing sort of this general theme, inshallah, today we're going to talk about jihad and what I call our Islam's just war theory. And this is a topic or a word, a concept that we hear all the time. And but oftentimes we hear it in a way that's not complete. I would say would be the right word. But before we jump into the topic, as is my habit, I want to summarize everything I'm going to say with a picture. Does anyone know what this picture is? This is a picture of a dial control area of a Soviet nuclear power plant. Okay? And, pardon?
Plenty of dials. Yeah.
Plenty, and there's only like partial, there's more to it. And I always give these pictures because I'm trying to just make it simple that we understand what the issue is, because there's what we're going to talk about is why there's a problem in the way some Muslims talk about jihad. And if you were a technician working in this power plant, obviously you would need to know how to read those dials. Now we don't know what those, I have no idea what those dials mean. They have all these numbers, they all go from 0 to 7, and all of the dials, they're different colors, they're at different numbers, they're at different positions. We have no idea what it means. So if you were standing there, if one of you had a relative that was working there and they said, I have to step out for lunch, can you just make sure everything's okay? You wouldn't know. You wouldn't know if the reactor's about to go nuclear, or if the plutonium spilled or anything like that. You have no idea. And nor should you know, because you weren't trained. So when we talk about a concept like jihad, it's the same thing. We need to know what these dials in the subject of jihad is, in order for it to make sense to us, in order for us to understand when we hear that word, when we read it in the Quran, what does it mean? When we read it in a hadith, what does it mean? And more importantly, when someone uses it in a way that doesn't make sense to us, we can understand why it doesn't make sense, what's wrong with it. Is that fair enough? Okay, so remember this image of the dials. So what is jihad? Jihad is simply a verb that talks about exerting some kind of effort in order to achieve a goal. That's what the word jihad means in the Arabic language. So when we come to read the Quran and the Hadith, and when we want to derive meaning from it and understand what they mean, we have to do that from the Arabic language. Now you can read these things in translation to have an approximate idea of what it means. But if you want to understand exactly how to use what is being said, you have to go back to the original Arabic language, which is why every Muslim community, Sunni, Shia, every Muslim community that has scholarship, Islamic scholarship, it's all done in the Arabic language. People in the Indian subcontinent, they all study in Arabic. People in Qum, in Iran, they study in Arabic. And obviously their native tongue, but to understand exactly what the verses mean, exactly what the hadith mean, you need to know what the original Arabic means. So this concept, jihad, okay, what does the word mean? You look it up in the dictionary, it's exerting effort to achieve a goal. And honestly, the subject of jihad is that simple. If you understand those words, effort and goal, you will understand everything we'll talk about. It'll be very, very simple. That it's an effort for a goal. Make sense? Let's talk about how this word is used in the Quran and in the Hadith. Let's just some examples, okay, to make this make sense. In chapter 31:15, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks about being obedient to your parents. And He says you have to obey your parents even if they're not believers. This is the context. In everything, except one thing. If they try to struggle with you, exert effort on you to disbelieve. That part you ignore. But other than that, you are obedient. So He says, but if they strive وَإِن جَاهَدَاكَ, the Quran says, using the verb jihad. وَإِن جَاهَدَاكَ, if they strive to make you join in worship with me, to have polytheism, obey them not. وَصَاحِبُهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا, but bear their company in this life with justice, and follow the way of those who turn to me in love. So why am I bringing up this verse? I'm just trying to emphasize that even in our own literature, the word jihad is used, the verb jihad is used as some kind of struggle. So here the parents are, if we go back, they're exerting extra effort on the child to associate some kind of belief with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a goal to that effort. Okay? Let me give you another example from the hadith. Is this clear, by the way? Everyone got this? Okay, so this is the word jihad. It has nothing to do with warfare or anything like that, but I'm just giving you an example from the Quran of how it's used. An example from the hadith. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was asked, what is the best form of charity? And he said, jahdul muqil, the effort of the needy person. What does that mean? What does that hadith mean? It means that the person who does not have money or who has very little money, if they take from the very little that they have and they give, that charity is more worth to it in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than if the wealthy person gives a lot, but that lot in comparison to their wealth is very little. So if I'm worth $100 million and I give $10,000 to the mosque, Imam Faisal will be doing backflips. But at the end of the day, that's very little compared to my worth. But if I only have $100 in my pocket or $100 in my account, and I give $50 to the mosque, then I have essentially given half my net worth to the mosque. That's what the Prophet ﷺ is saying. That in the spiritual realm, now as far as the accountant of the mosque is concerned, money is money. The more dollar amount, that's what they want. But here the Prophet ﷺ is saying, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the best kind of charity is the charity of the person who really doesn't have. That person is really supposed to receive charity. But they take the little that they have and they give it. And the word that he uses is that word related to jihad. He said, jahdul muqil, the effort, the struggle of the person who has very little. So here we are, another hadith, another text in which the word jihad is used. And we see that it is some kind of effort, some kind of struggle, some kind of energy is exerted to achieve some kind of goal. Good? All right. Now, that's obviously not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about, a just war theory or jihad as combat and warfare. And what does Islam have to say about that? But believe it or not, what we have just indicated is going to be crucial for us to understand that. So when it comes to the word jihad, the concept of jihad as it relates to armed warfare or combat, whatever you want to say, it's some kind of armed struggle with conditions to produce a specific outcome. Now, in our Asim, can I move or do I have to stay? I can move. Okay. In our faith, we have actions and we have beliefs, right? There are certain things that we believe, and it's just that we believe in them. We believe that there's one God. We believe that the Prophet ﷺ is a prophet, a seal of all. We just believe in them. But then there are things that we do. We have to make wudu, we have to wash, we have to pray. There are things that we have to do. Those two areas, they fall in different categories within the intellectual space of Islam. Our actions, that's what the Sharia talks about. So whenever you hear the word Sharia or Islamic law, it deals with actions. Belief, that's our theology, our aqeedah, or what we call ilmul kalam, the theological sciences. It regulates what we believe. So when we say that jihad is an armed struggle, is this a belief or is this an action? It's an action. So therefore, it automatically falls under the category of the Sharia. So you're going to look to the law. What does the law say about jihad? And the reason I'm emphasizing this, and I'll give you a sort of a sneak peek, at the end we will see that extremists, they do the opposite. They see jihad as something that has to do with belief. But that's incorrect. And that's the essence of their mistake, is that jihad is not an issue of belief. It's an issue that is regular, it's an action. And every action in the Sharia has conditions. Can you pray without wudu? No, because wudu is a condition for the prayer. Now what happens if you don't have water? Or if you're sick and you can't use water? You make tayammum, right? You don't just say, well, I have no water, I'm going to pray anyway. No, even in that case, you have to have tayammum, the dry ablution. Can you pray and not face Mecca? Can you pray and face Texas? The prayer won't be valid. So the facing Mecca is a condition. Right now, it's like 6:20. Can we pray Maghrib right now? Why? Because the sun hasn't set. So the sun setting is a condition for Maghrib prayer. So on and so forth, everything in the Sharia. Think about when we fast. And I bring up these examples because you all know the answers to them, but maybe you never thought about them in this way, that these are conditions. You know, if it's Ramadan and we're fasting, and there's 2 minutes left for Maghrib, you can't break. If you ate at that moment knowingly, then you would have wasted your whole fast day. You'd have to make it up. So breaking your fast, there are conditions. Everything that we do, every action that we do in our Islamic life has conditions. So if jihad, we agree, is an action, of course, in this case armed conflict, fighting, warfare, then that means automatically there are conditions. And as we said that the word jihad means a struggle associated with a goal, then there must be some specific outcome that this combat or this warfare is aimed at achieving. Okay, so that's what the jihad in the form of armed conflict means. So we need to know what these conditions and what these goals are. Just like when we want to pray, if you're teaching someone to pray, or you're teaching your children to pray or to fast, or if somebody comes and asks a question about zakah, how do I give alms? You have to explain to them the conditions. Now, if those conditions do not exist, then the action also does not exist. So if your arm, for example, God forbid, was cut off, you would not have to make wudu on this portion of your body because it's gone. It's not like you move up here and you make wudu on your shoulder. It's gone. If you're sick and the doctor says don't fast, then the condition for you, the condition of health in order to fast is gone. You don't fast. If you're traveling, you have the license not to fast or to shorten your prayers or to combine your prayers. But if you're not traveling, you can't do those things because the condition is part of the act. So what they taught us when we were in seminary, they said that this is the act and these are the conditions and they're linked together. If the condition exists, then the act exists. If the condition does not exist, then the act does not exist. So jihad is the same way. And I'm just trying to make it because these are very simple. I know these lectures talk about all of this nonsense that we read about every day, but it's actually quite simple. Jihad is an act, and therefore there needs to be conditions and goals. If those conditions exist, jihad exists. If those conditions don't exist, there is no jihad. Very simple. So to understand this concept of Islam's just war theory, we must understand the conditions and the goal. Before we do that, one last thing related to Islam's concept of the just war theory is this concept of the greater and the lesser jihad. Have you guys heard of this before? The Prophet ﷺ was coming back from a battle, one of the many battles that he was engaged in, and as he was returning to Medina, he turned to the companions and he said, "We have returned from the lesser jihad to the greater jihad." Have you guys heard this hadith or this story before?
Yes.
Yes? So he refers to the battle that they were just in, with swords and bow and arrow and horses and shields and prisoners and loss of life, all of that. He referred to all of that as the lesser jihad. And he said, now when we come home, we have the greater jihad. What did he mean by that? Jihadun nafs. This is what we call in Islam your individual struggle, your individual effort to better yourself. But you see how the Prophet ﷺ, he calls it greater. I mean, what could be more intense than fighting someone with a sword, like hand-to-hand combat? That seems pretty intense. Why did he call that the lesser jihad? Because that's like a one-off thing. You're not going to do that all the time. But your nafs, yourself, you can't escape from yourself unless you die. Every moment of your life, you are with yourself. So he called this the greater struggle. To be a better person is the greater effort, the greater battle is to better oneself as much as is possible. And the Quran talks about this all the time. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. Felicitous is the one who improves themselves. Wretched is the one who does not. And Allah talks in the Quran about the different levels of the soul. An-nafsul ammara bisu, the soul that calls to bad actions. An-nafsul lawama, the blameworthy soul. So on and so forth. So the idea is we have a personal struggle. Each one of us, old, young, men, women, we have an individual obligation to be the best form of ourselves that we can be. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, that's the greater jihad. That war, that battle that we came from, that's a small thing. Because there are certain conditions and goals that required us to do that. But the greater battle is the battle against ourselves. So therefore, if we come to talk about jihad as a just war theory, it is linked to this spiritual quest that we each have. That the spiritual dimension that we each carry, that obligation that we each have, is part and parcel with the other side of jihad in the sense of armed conflict. That they have to be linked. That they're not separate. Okay, so that's really, really important. How does God talk about the jihad in the Quran? So look at this from chapter 22, verse 39. Sanction or permission has been given to you to fight because you have been wronged. أُذِنَ لِلَّذِينَ أَنْ يُقَاتِلُوا بِأَنَّهُمْ ظُلِمُوا. So since you have been wronged, since there has been injustice against you, it has been given permission that you fight. And God is indeed able to give them victory. So here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that the condition for fighting is that you have been witness or somebody has transgressed against you in an unjust way. You see, look how easy, this is one verse. Look how easy it is. The condition is in the verse. God is saying that permission, sanction, udhinu, this sanction has been given to fight because, you look at even in the translation, because you have been wronged. So what if you're not wronged? The opposite understand. What if you're not wronged? Then there's no permission to fight. You see? Very simple. Why? Because the condition is part of the act. And here Allah is saying that the condition to fight. Now this is like bang bang jihad. This is not like the kumbaya stuff that I'm talking about. The fight here is armed conflict. God is saying in this verse, you are allowed to fight, even to use lethal force, if you have been wrong. So here this is one condition. Okay? This is from Surah Al-Baqarah. Fight, the Arabic, وَقَاتِلُوا. So fight, yes.
Sorry, in the previous slide.
Yeah. Meaning that if you have to defend yourself, then be confident, and somebody wronged you, I mean legitimately wronged you, then have no fear. God will give you the victory that you need. Either the victory over the enemy, or victory that the injustice will stop, or victory that there will be peace, or some kind of, but have trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if you're persecuted, you're not going to feel so happy. So this, and God is indeed able to give them victory, is the first group. Not the group that does the injustice, but the group that's defending itself. Yeah. Well, it's translation. Okay? Fight in the way of God against those who fight against you. وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ. So what is the condition? What's happening in this scenario? Is that somebody's fighting you. So God is saying, fight back. You have the right to defend yourself. Why do we have the right to defend ourselves? Because there's a greater principle, which is we have each an obligation to preserve our life as best as we can, because this is something that Allah has given us. This is what we call maqasid al-sharia, the greater principles of the sharia. The first of them is the protection of life. So the reason you have to defend yourself if somebody's about to kill you is not because your kids are going to be upset if you die, or because it's a fight or flight response. No, morally the reason we do it is that we don't own our life. This life has been given to us as a gift. And therefore we owe the person who has, or astaghfirullah, we owe Allah who gave us this life that we preserve it. So here, and that's very important because that creates a different psychology when you think about these things. Fight in the way of God against those who fight you. But begin not hostilities. Look at that, so simple. But don't start the fight. So here the condition is, this is all defensive. If somebody's fighting you, then fight back. But don't start. Even if you don't like them, you don't like how they look, you don't like how they smell, you don't like what they say, it doesn't matter. Don't begin the hostilities. Why? Because Allah does not love the aggressor. So Allah is saying the person who starts fighting, who creates the fight, who creates the killing, who creates combat, is the aggressor. But Islam is a realistic paradigm. If somebody is fighting against you, then you have the right to fight back. This is my favorite. Again in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 216, God addressing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, He says, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكَ الْقِتَالُ وَهُوَ كُرْهٌ لَكُمْ. Fighting, warfare is ordained for you, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, though it is hateful to you. Meaning that by nature, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not like this. That his nature was not to fight. That his nature was against this kind of conflict. Which is why it had to come through revelation. And then God says, but you might hate something and it's good for you. وَعَسَى أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. وَعَسَى أَن تُحِبُّ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌ لَكُمْ. But you might love something and it's bad for you. So in this case, what's the scenario? The Prophet ﷺ had tried for 13 years, from the age of 40 to the age of 53, he tried for 13 years to coexist with the Quraysh. And they killed him, they tried to kill him, they persecuted them, they spit on him, they threw trash on him, they tortured the other companions, they kicked them outside of Mecca, they wouldn't trade with them, they wouldn't give them water, for 13 years. This was the condition of Islam and the condition of the Muslims. For 13 years, we wouldn't even tolerate a week of somebody treating us. 13 years. But still the Prophet ﷺ did not want to take action. So he went to Medina. He left. And the problem came after him. And he made a nation state in Medina. And he had a constitution with all of these other religious groups, the Jews, the polytheists, the Aus, the Khazraj, these Muslims, non-Muslims, one happy community. But still the Quraysh came after him. So he exhausted everything. He exhausted everything that he could exhaust. So then Allah in that condition is telling him, look, you have to fight. And I know you don't want to fight, but you have to. Because this is the only way that you will get that goal of peace. You see how that's a very different narrative than what sometimes we hear about jihad. So this verse really speaks to the nature of the Prophet ﷺ. His nature of being a person of love and a peaceful person and a mercy, because we call him Nabiyur Rahmah, the Nabi, the Prophet of mercy. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةٌ لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We have not sent you except as a mercy to mankind. So this is very, very important. So this gives us, and there are more verses in the Quran, but I wanted to give you some of these to show you how in the same verse, the act of jihad is talked about linked to its conditions. And all of those conditions about you being persecuted, you being fought against, you having the right to defend yourself. Not about, going around bang, 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 because that's what jihad is, and going into a mall and yelling Allahu Akbar and, killing people. That's not jihad. Clearly, it's not jihad. So what are brass tacks? What are these conditions? Okay, so we talked about does anyone have any questions, by the way? Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah. I have listened to you a lot, but all I hear is from you presenting your presentation is about what the Western media will call fundamentalists or extremists, and now I hear you call them jihadists. All they're doing is bam, bam, bam over who they're killing. But the question to you is, you're doing a very good job, and you're very eloquent, and I appreciate that. But what is missing from the equation is the fact that you're not talking about the other side. Who are they fighting? Why are they fighting them? And why are they bam, bam, bam on brothers and sisters around the world? Why not the Western media? Because the problem is, when there are a problem, the problem is two-sided. It's okay to talk about the area you are an expert of. I accept. But when you try to inform us, educate us, we don't want to hear only one side. We want to hear the other side.
Yeah, we're coming to the other side.
Why is only fight?
We're coming to the other side. I'm just giving us a tour of what the theory of jihad is according to Sunni thinking. When I'm done, we're going to get to the other side.
But why you call them jihadists? Jihadists is the Western perspective about.
I didn't say jihadist.
I think you came late. He's just describing Quranic aspects.
Yeah, we're just talking about what the Quran and the Sunnah say about jihad. That's all we're doing right now.
Oh, well, because a few minutes ago you said jihadists. Okay, all right.
We're coming.
Okay.
Did anyone have another question? Yes, sir.
I think there are a couple of points. One is the word jihad. You didn't mention the word kitab.
Okay.
All these things which were given permission is that the people who have been killed.
Yes.
Is it for an individual or it is, so that you have to make a distinction between jihad and kitab. What's the difference between the two? Number two, is it for an individual or for a community?
Yes.
Or for a collective people?
Okay.
And Prophet ﷺ was getting a wahi from Allah to do it, fight it or not fight it, hold off. We are not the one, we just have a Quran now. And one person interpret individual that my family was killed, so I should go ahead and kill someone.
Yes.
Second person is, we are not even united, that there is one person who decides.
Yes.
There are lots of people interpreting.
Good.
So if you could make a distinction between...
Okay, actually, that's the first point. Good. You're anticipating. Right. But about what I've said, is there anything that was not clear or any questions about that? Okay. So your first point is that, yes.
One day, one scholar was preaching about the jihad. I forgot the name of the scholar on YouTube. He was saying that nowadays nobody is rightful to call the jihad because it is only the Prophet of Allah who can do it.
Okay.
Yeah, this is some comment.
Okay, there's similar comments. We're going to address them with this point right here. When we have a question like this, what do we do, jihad, the Quran, we go back, we look at the Quran, and we look at the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and we look at how the ulama, the scholars before us, interpreted these verses, these hadith, and codified these rules in the different books of fiqh. So we have a very rich, this is one of the benefits that we have extremely rich history, intellectual history to answer these questions. The first thing that the jurists, they noticed is they said every time the Prophet ﷺ sent somebody out to fight, Muslims out to fight, there was always literally a flag, there was literally a banner for the whole army. Even though the army would be split up in maybe 5 units or 4 units or 3 units, and each unit had its own flag, but there was one flag bearer for the entire army. And the flag of the Prophet ﷺ was white. So they came up with this concept that jihad, fighting, warfare, can only happen under a political banner. تحت راية, that's the word that they use in the fiqh. What does that mean? It means in our language that there has to be some sort of recognized state, nation state or government that officially declares war against another state or government. Like in this country, theoretically we're supposed to have Congress issue the declaration of war. Theoretically. It doesn't happen always that way, but on the books that's what it is. That there's supposed to be some announcement that the people that we've elected come together and be like, yes, we need to go and defend, fight, join this coalition, something like that. So what they took from this is that jihad in the concept of war is a tool of the state, not a tool of the individual. So it's not like wudu, where we all have to make wudu. It's not like that kind of stuff. This is something that happens when you have a government, when you have a state. And to answer the questions about, well, who does this now and things like that, we don't all agree. From a long time ago, from the medieval period, the jurists, they acknowledged that the ummah, the entire nation, can have multiple governments or multiple leaders, what we call today countries. It doesn't have to be one. Because the truth is we really never had that. Maybe, like with Sayyidina Abu Bakr or something like that. But very shortly after the Sahaba, the 4 or 5 first Khalifas, everything splintered. And there are all of these different groups. So the ulama, they said, what matters is that those entities, identify as Muslims and use Islamic law as their legal system. It doesn't matter if there's 1 or if there's 50. We can all coexist. So this is an old debate that the Sunni ulama, they dealt with. The Shias, they have a different way of looking at governance. But I don't want to get into that because that's a big tangent. So what the ulama today say is that each nation state, each country, they have a government, they're internationally recognized, they have an ambassador to the United Nations, the international community recognizes them. These are the people that make this decision. That's where the banner is. Not with us. Because it's not a tool for the individual. It's a tool of the state. That's very, very important. The jihad is not like a tool that the mosque uses in the sense of warfare. It's a tool of the state. It's a tool of a government. It's a tool of the head of state. And that's from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. The second thing they noticed is that the Prophet ﷺ, when he spoke about jihad, he was very clear that there are geographic areas that you can fight in, and there are many geographic areas that you can't fight in. So, and this is my language or modern language, there's a concept of a combat zone. And by extension, there are places that are not combat zones. So the Prophet ﷺ said, you can't attack places of worship. Not mosques, mosques of course, but he didn't just say masajid, but places of worship of other religions. You can't attack them. And by extension, you can't attack those people, the people of the cloth, as we say in English, the religious people, the clergy, the people that service these places. You can't attack them. So there are places that you're not allowed to attack. And that there is a zone, a theater of combat, that if it is legitimate, you are able to engage in that. So the rules of fighting in the Sharia are very much about what you can't do, not just about what you can do. And then by extension, this is the same kind of thinking with people. There are people that are combatants and there are people that are not combatants. So the Prophet ﷺ said you can't attack old people, men and women. You can't attack young people. You can't attack women. You can't hurt the environment. So you can't I'm going to, set blaze to this forest or something like that. You can't hurt the environment in your quest to fight. So that would be sort of one of the combat zones or non-combat zones, but by extension then there are also people that you can legitimately attack and there are people that you cannot attack. That you cannot. So when you start to think like this is very hard to do, especially with modern warfare. More innocent people die now as a result of all of these supposedly smart bombs and drones and things like that than combatants. So from the strictly, and I'm not a politician or a war expert, but I'm just saying from the Sharia point of view, that's very questionable. Even if there is legitimate conflict, even if there's the enemy, if somebody is hiding, these are real moral issues that we need to be a part of the conversation of, because the loss of life in Islam is so great. Is so great. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if you kill one innocent person, and here Allah quotes the Torah. Right? This is a verse from the Jewish from the Talmud. And Allah quotes in the Quran. And He says, because of this, كَتَبْنَا عَلَى بَنِي إِسْرَائِيل, we prescribed on the children of Israel that whoever kills one person is as if they have killed all of humanity. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine having that sin on you? I mean, we have a hard enough time living with our own deficiencies. Can you imagine killing an innocent person, what that means? When Allah says it's as if you killed all of humanity. So all of these drone strikes and stuff create these moral questions that we need to answer. Because in our Sharia, there are places that you can't fight and there are people that you can't kill no matter what. So maybe we need smarter bombs or smarter technology, or genius bombs or something, but that becomes an issue. So we start to understand that it's a lot about what you can't do. It's not about just go out and do what you want, bang, bang, bang. A consequence of war, of course, is there are prisoners. So we have a very elaborate literature about how you treat prisoners of war. That prisoners of war have to be, in our language of today, you have to preserve their human rights. You can't torture them, you have to feed them. It's actually kind of like a burden, because now you have all these people you have to take care of, but they're prisoners. So you have to spend money on them. And even though that we have these rules you'll find very compatible with international standards today. There's no surprise there. I mean, this is not a big deal. But what's interesting about prisoners of war is that the Prophet ﷺ, he had a different theory. Even though there is, what's on the books, he himself, he had a different theory of dealing with prisoners of war. Do you know what the Prophet ﷺ did with the prisoners of war that he captured?
Some he freed for teaching the Muslim Ummah. Some he took the money. Some he treated them the same as he treated.
You see, the first thing that this gentleman said is he freed them because he said the prisoners that he captured, after Badr and things like that, they were the people of Quraysh, they were very sophisticated. And they had a skill set, they could read and they could write. And he valued that more than the leverage in battle and in politics that having prisoners of war would cause. So he said, if you teach my people, my companions how to read and write, I'll free you. You can earn your freedom if you can teach them. Do you see the value that the Prophet hasn't put on education? I mean, this is unbelievable. But you think about countries that have people that are political prisoners for years and decades and they use them as bargaining chips. Right? I mean, if the Prophet ﷺ had captured this top tier of the people of Quraysh, he could have easily used them as a bargaining chip and maybe gotten more leverage from the people of Quraysh and Mecca at that time, but he didn't. because he valued education. So he used them to teach his people, 10 of his companions a piece how to read and write, and then he would send them back. He would send them back to enemy lines against a known declared enemy. Think about that. So if we want to talk about jihad, we got to talk about all of this stuff to see how the Prophet ﷺ lived this, and then compare that with what we see today. And then lastly, about rules of engagement and stuff, I want to talk a little bit about this concept of safe passage. And in Islam, there are some things that the Arabs, the pre-Islamic Arabs did that the Prophet ﷺ adopted, and it became part of our way. And the concept of safe passage is one of them. The Arab tribes before Islam, they used to fight over the silliest things forever. Generation after, they would keep fighting back and forth, and that's why we call them the age of ignorance, Asr Jahiliyyah. But constantly fighting, it becomes very difficult to do business and to travel, and they traveled by trade and caravan. So the Arabs, they had this concept of al-jiwar, this concept of safe passage, that if you come with me, I said, no, he's with me, he's safe. So if this guy is with me and I enter into my people, no one can harm him. So the Prophet ﷺ accepted this notion. And in our Sharia, again, theoretically, what's on the books, is that anybody from the community of Muslims can give safe passage to anybody. Even a child can give safe passage. It doesn't have to be like the head of state or the head of the security or the head of the police. Anybody could get, and if you follow the seerah, you would see that. During the conquest of Mecca, for example, one example that comes to mind, the Prophet ﷺ had camped out before Mecca, and Abu Sufyan, he started to realize that he's about to lose, so he wanted to go negotiate peace with the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? The Prophet ﷺ came with 10,000 Muslims from Medina. And even though he didn't want to fight, he was prepared that if he had to fight, he would fight, because the people of Quraysh were very duplicitous, so he knew that he couldn't trust them. And the Prophet's uncle, ﷺ, he had converted, and he was he was living in Mecca, and he was going to go visit his nephew, the Prophet ﷺ, and he saw Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan had not become Muslim at this point, and Abu Sufyan said, I want to go see the Prophet ﷺ. He said, okay, ride with me, you're safe, you're with me. And the mule that they were riding happened to be the mule of the Prophet ﷺ. So he said, if anyone sees anyone on this, they'll know that this vehicle, it has like the flag of the Prophet. Think of that. Think of somebody was in the limo with the President of the United States. Well, that's somebody important, so you can't touch that. You have to let them go. You have to think like that. So he took Abu Sufyan to the Prophet. So there was no agreement between the Prophet ﷺ and his uncle that they would give Abu Sufyan. There was no visa stamp in his check-in or something like that. Anybody from the community could take somebody and give them safe passage. And it's really this concept, if you read the seerah in detail, that allows a lot of these negotiations to happen to avoid further bloodshed, to avoid further conflict throughout the Prophet's life. And as a matter of fact, this episode by Abu Sufyan coming is how Mecca was taken by the Prophet ﷺ without any bloodshed. So there's this concept of safe passage. Now, the way you can think about this today is the issuance of visas. So if you go to a country and you get a visa to enter the country, or when you enter the country at passport control and your passport is stamped, that means you have the right to safely operate and do your thing in that country. And no one has the right of that country to harm you. Now, if you commit a crime, that's a different story. But what that means is that a lot of times countries don't like each other. Like, imagine if you're the Israeli ambassador in Cairo, because there's an Israeli embassy in Cairo. That must be a really tough job. But that Israeli ambassador, his wife, his children, his staff, they all have safe passage. This is a diplomatic relation between Egypt and Israel. Doesn't mean you have to like each other, doesn't mean you have to agree with each other, but it means that it's safe. You can't harm this person. You have to respect this person. They have safe passage. So this is also part of the Sharia. Now think of, maybe the Indian ambassador in Pakistan, I don't even know of the relationship between these two countries, but imagine the Pakistani ambassador in India and the Indian ambassador in Pakistan. Imagine, two countries that hate each other, but there's like this cold relationship and there's some diplomatic relations and ambassadors and stuff like that. That's safe passage. These people are safe. Now imagine, because I know Egypt, because I'm from Egypt, so I know a lot of these examples. In some of the beach resorts in Egypt, you see Israelis, they come and they vacation. That means they have safe passage. You can't harm those people. You can't go to the Olympics and take some athletes representing some country hostage, because those people have safe passage. This is part of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. That's what I'm trying to emphasize. So I'm giving you these examples from history from the 70s and the 80s. Some of you might remember Munich and these type of things. You can't do stuff like that in the name of Islam. You want to do that, you shouldn't. Don't use the name of Islam. You call it something else. But this is Islam, what we're talking about. This is what we have. We like it, we don't like it, we submit to it. That's why we're Muslim. We submit to it. Because this is what the Prophet ﷺ taught us. And if you read the seerah and you understand this, you will see how this alone created miracles. Abu Sufyan, before the Prophet ﷺ came to Mecca, he went all by himself to Medina to beg for peace, because there was a violation of the Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah. Imagine this, the head of one state coming, they didn't like him. Umar ibn al-Khattab didn't want to talk to him. Abu Bakr didn't talk to him. The Prophet ﷺ ignored him, but no one harmed him because he was safe. There was some safe concept of safe passage. Okay, so that's very important as far as the rules of engagement. What I've tried to present over the last maybe 20, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, is if somebody asked, what is jihad in Islam? That's what I've tried to do. This is what it means linguistically. This is how it's used in the literature. If you're asking specifically about armed conflict, combat, qital, war, these are the rules of engagement, so on and so forth. Now, in just the time remaining, maybe about 10 minutes or less, inshallah, I want to talk a little bit, what's the narrative that extremists use for jihad? So we can understand the differences. The first thing I mentioned before is that they think that jihad is a theological concept, not a concept of law. So it's something that's not a legal tool of the state, which I have presented to you, but rather it's a theological concept. It's something that you have to believe in. The way that you believe in La ilaha illallah, the way that you believe in Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the way that you believe that you have to pray 5 times a day. You also have this jihad. And because it's a theological concept for them, it's constant. You have to do jihad all the time. Can you believe in La ilaha illallah just like in the morning? Or do you have to believe in La ilaha illallah your whole life? Your whole life. Do you pray 5 times a day just on Mondays? Or do you have to pray 5 times a day every day? All the time. So if it's a belief, then the belief is constant. So for them, jihad is a constant mandate. Do you notice how these extremists, they never stop? There's always more fighting. There's always somebody else to attack, somebody else to take hostage, somebody else to kill. Why? Because for them it's a theological issue, not a legal issue. And that's why I said that's the first mistake and the most disastrous mistake that they made. It's not a theological issue. It's an issue of law that has conditions, so on and so forth. The other thing is they have no political authorization. Remember how I said that jihad as armed conflict, as qital, as fighting, is a tool of the state that has conditions and has a goal. These people, they have no state, they have no government, they have no nation that's recognized. They're just a group of people that got together and said, we're going to do this. We're going to do jihad because it's a theological issue, it's something that you have to believe in, and therefore it's something that always has to happen, and therefore since we're right and everyone else is wrong, we have the right to do it. So see the Imagine if you got on a bus from here and you wanted to go to New York for the weekend, but you got on a bus that's going to on 95 South. 7, 8 hours later, where are you going to be? You're going to be in Georgia. You're not going to be in New York City. And you're going to get off the bus and you'll be like, the city that never sleeps, the Big Apple, and then you find out that you're in Atlanta. And you see this big Coke factory or CNN or something. But you had the right intention. You really wanted to go to New York, but you started off on the wrong bus or you started off on the wrong train. These people, they've made the same kind of mistake. They start off wrong, and that one mistake leads to another conclusion that's wrong, that leads to another conclusion that's wrong, and then they just go around and they start bang, bang, bang. But the first mistake is that it's not, to start out, it's not a theological, it's not an aqeedah issue. It's an issue of law. So you can see how there is this one thing leads to another. And of course, they make no distinction between the combatants and the non-combatants. You have some aid worker, who's maybe some half-naive person that thinks they're going to join this NGO and, go and help, messed up people and messed up countries. Somebody who has been given a visa, someone who has safe passage, someone who to start out with is not in the army or the armed forces. An aid worker working on some water project, and then they take this poor person hostage, they make him face the camera and say all this nonsense and cut off his head. These are non-combatants. We're not allowed to do that. Neither in our secular way of thinking and international standards and Geneva Conventions and all of that, or in our Sharia is that allowed. And about combatants and non-combatants, they kill more Muslims than non-Muslims. They kill people like us. And they blow up Shia mosques and they blow up shrine and all of this darkness in the name of some theological belief that they have that is to start out wrong. But they make no distinctions. The Prophet ﷺ said, a time will come, there will be great tribulation, there will be great fitna. And he called this the blind, dumb fitna. The blind, weeping fitna. Fitnat amya bakma. That it will be blind. And the Sahaba, they're like, whoa, that's messed up. What is that? What's going to happen at that time? And he said they'll be killing all the time. To the point that the one killing will not know why they killed. And the one that was killed will not know why they were killed. لا يدري القاتل فيما قتل ولا المقتول فيما قتل. It's just all blind killing, indiscriminate killing. And that's the key here. We do not, and many times when we do these presentations, we get on the topic of, but there's all this injustice in the world, and of course there is. It's a messed up place sometimes. But, Syria, for example, not that I want this to be about Syria, but look at the Syria thing. I honestly do not know what is happening. And I bet that none of us really know who is who and what's happening. All I know is that every day little kids are dying. And people are being kicked out of their homes. And the country is being disintegrated. But I have no idea who these groups are, who they represent, who funds them. Like these ISIS people. They always have these new camouflage uniform. Is there some Target out there that they go and they get the camouflage from? And all these shiny, it's so disturbing to see when you look at it with a discernment. When you look at it and you try to understand, you have no idea. It's all confusion. And this is the time that the Prophet ﷺ will happen. People like us, we will not know. I'm sure there are people that know, but people like us will not know. But what I do know is the stuff that I'm presenting to you is that is not what the Sharia teaches. That's not what the Prophet ﷺ taught. So if we want to talk about jihad and understand it, we need to understand it as a legal issue. We need to understand it as a tool of the state. We need to understand that there are conditions, there are rules of engagement, so on and so forth. So that we can confidently say, when we look at that, that's not Islam. That's not what Al-Mustafa taught us, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. That's something else. And the Prophet, he warned us that this will happen. And he said, when this happens, come together as a community and stay together as a community, which is why these gatherings are so important. So we can remind ourselves and not fall into the confusion.